The first time Adrian Vale looked at me, it wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Like he'd finally found a missing piece and didn't want anyone else to notice. I was in the Orion Systems lobby, clutching a folder I didn't need. I wasn't an employee anymore, not officially, just a consultant doing a 1-week compliance review, quiet, temporary, forgettable. That's what I told myself. But Adrian Vale didn't do forgettable. He walked straight toward me through the marble and glass chaos, ignoring executives and assistants. "Ms. Hart," he said, voice low, "come with me." I blinked. "Do I know you?" "You know my company," he replied. "That's enough." His assistant tried to follow. Adrian lifted a finger, one gesture, and she froze behind him like a paused video. He led me into an elevator that required a key card and a thumbprint. The doors closed. Silence fell like a trap. "Why am I here?" I asked. Adrian's gaze flicked to the security camera in the corner. Then he pressed a button. The elevator music started. Loud, obnoxious jazz. He leaned closer, lips near my ear. "Because someone is about to leak my firm's internal audit." My throat tightened. "Then call the police." "I can't," he said. "Not yet?" The elevator opened on the executive floor. He walked me into a private office with black walls and a view of London that looked like it belonged to him. On his desk sat a thin folder with a red stripe. He slid it toward me. "Confidential agreement. Personal services contract." My stomach dropped. "Personal services?" Adrian didn't smile. "You're going to be my fiancée." I actually laughed. "No." His eyes stayed calm. "Hidden contract fiancé." "What does that even mean?" "It means," he said, "the board believes I'm reckless. They want to replace me. They'll do it by claiming I'm unstable, too distracted, too alone, too easy to corner." I crossed my arms. "So you're hiring a relationship." "I'm hiring a shield," he corrected. "A quiet engagement the board can't manipulate. Someone outside the company." "And you picked me. Why?" Adrian's gaze pinned me. "Because you're careful. And because you already know the one secret they don't want out." I froze. 2 years ago, I'd done freelance crisis work for a smaller tech firm. I'd heard rumors, whispers of Orion's Black Vault, a file repository of internal reports, sensitive research, and, if the rumors were true, evidence of illegal surveillance tech. I'd never told anyone, not because I was noble, because I didn't want to die of curiosity. "You're wrong," I said. Adrian leaned forward slightly. "You're not a journalist, you're not a clout chaser, and you're not on anyone's payroll." He tapped the folder. "Sign, and you'll get enough money to pay off your rent, your student debt, and the medical bills you've been ignoring." My chest tightened. "You investigated me." "I investigate everyone," he said simply, "especially people who could destroy me." The honesty made my skin prickle. I stared at the contract. "How long?" 9 weeks, he said. "Until the board vote." 9 weeks of pretending? 9 weeks of being seen with me, he corrected. "Publicly enough to stop questions, privately enough to stay safe." I hesitated. "Rules?" Adrian nodded. "Rules?" "No intimacy," I said quickly. His gaze held mine. "Agreed." "No living together." "Agreed." "And no destroying my life if this goes wrong." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to prevent that." My pen hovered. I should have walked out. But the truth is, I'd liked Adrian Vale long before he offered me a contract. Not celebrity crush, liked him. The real kind. The kind that grows from watching someone be hard to everyone except the people below them. I'd met him once before, months ago, when Orion donated equipment to a women's tech program I helped run. Adrian had stayed after the photo op, quietly fixing a student's broken laptop himself. He'd looked up at me that day and said, "People don't need saving, they need chances." That line had stuck in my ribs ever since. So I signed. The ring appeared a minute later, simple, elegant. Adrian slid it onto my finger without theatrics. His thumb brushed my knuckle. barely there, but my heart heard it like thunder. By day 3, the whispers started. Who is she? Where did he find her? Is this real? By day 5, the board chair, Celeste Vane, gave me a smile sharp enough to cut skin. Congratulations, she murmured, eyes on my ring. Adrian doesn't choose lightly. By day 7, Adrian and I had learned the choreography. Hand at my back in public, distance in private, conversations that were too personal for business and too careful for love. And somewhere between late-night strategy meetings and staged public appearances, something shifted. Not in the contract, in him. He didn't soften, not outwardly. Adrian Vale still wore his control-like armor, still spoke in clipped sentences, still looked like a man who didn't get moved by anything human. I noticed it in the way he started checking if I'd eaten, in the way he sent his driver to pick me up when the rain was heavy. It was in the way he never asked if I was okay. He just adjusted the situation so I wouldn't have to admit I wasn't. The first time a photographer tried to pull us closer, Adrian's arm came around my waist for half a second, professional, practiced, until my body betrayed me with a small shiver. He felt it, and I felt him feel it. His expression didn't move, but his fingers tightened, just slightly, like he'd taken quiet satisfaction from a reaction he hadn't earned the right to enjoy. Then he let go, face unreadable, as if nothing happened. After that, he became cautious, not with his words, with my space. After that, he avoided letting the world push us together. When cameras surged, he'd take my hand, firm, steady, then excuse us with a cool nod, removing me from the crowd before anyone could demand more. He never said he cared about my comfort. He just made sure no one got the chance to test it again. Then came day 9, the night Adrian invited me to Orion's New Year charity gala, a glowing room full of power and perfume. We stood on the balcony away from the crowd, city lights flickering below. His voice was rough. Layla? There's something I need to tell you. My heart stuttered. I turned toward him. Yes? He took a breath like it cost him. His eyes held mine, unguarded. I didn't plan to. Veronica's voice cut through the balcony moment like a blade. Adrian, she called, breathless, too urgent to be polite. You need to see this, right now. He turned sharply, irritation flashing across his face at being interrupted. Not now. It's on every channel, she insisted, already lifting her phone as if the screen itself could force him to look. It's just watch. Something in her tone made the air change. Adrian took the phone from her hand. The second the screen lit up, the warmth in his face vanished, like someone had reached inside him and switched him off. I stepped closer without thinking, and the headline hit me at the exact same time it hit him. Orion Systems internal audit leaked, Black Vault details exposed. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. Below the headline was a screenshot, an email chain, and there it was. My name. My throat closed. My fingers went numb. No, I whispered. No, that's... Adrian slowly lifted his eyes to me. Not confusion, not shock. A hard, direct stare that made my skin tighten. Explain, he said, voice low, controlled, dangerously quiet. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because how do you explain a thing you didn't do when the proof is screaming on a screen? Adrian, it's not me. I managed, and even to my own ears, it sounded thin. His jaw flexed. It has your name. That doesn't mean... My voice shook. I didn't send anything. I swear to you. Adrian's gaze didn't soften. If anything, it sharpened. He stepped closer, the space between us suddenly too small. You were the only one outside the firm with proximity, he said, each word clipped. You were the only one who knew enough to make this believable? My chest tightened. You told me things. Yes, but I didn't. Stop. His voice snapped, louder now, breaking the night. Don't stand there and act like you don't understand what this looks like. Veronica hovered behind him, silent, watching. Eyes bright, like she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. My stomach twisted into knots. Adrian, please. I'm telling you the truth. He stared at me for a long beat. Then his expression hardened into something final. "Leave," he said. I blinked, stunned. "What?" "Leave, right now." "Adrian." "I don't want a speech," he cut in, voice sharp. "I don't want tears. I don't want excuses. You walk out of my life tonight." My breath broke. At least let me show you my phone, my emails, anything. Let me prove." He leaned closer, eyes dark. "You had one job," he said coldly. "One." I felt my eyes burn, but I refused to cry in front of her. I swallowed hard. "Fine." I turned and walked back inside with my legs trembling beneath me, forcing myself not to run. Behind me, I heard Veronica's voice, soft, satisfied. "I'm sorry, Adrian." I reached his home and packed in silence. Hands shaking, I folded clothes I couldn't afford to replace. I gathered the small things I'd brought into his world during the contract. My notebook, my charger, the cheap perfume I wore before. I learned his apartment didn't smell like anything at all. I kept expecting him to storm in, to demand my phone, to demand answers. He didn't. The quiet was worse. When I reached the ring, my fingers froze. It sat on my hand like a lie that had briefly felt like hope. I slid it off slowly. My throat tightened so painfully, I had to pause just to breathe. Then I walked to the living room. His table was perfectly clean. Glass, spotless, untouchable. I placed the ring there, right in the center, not dramatic, not tossed, just set down like evidence. A small, shining surrender. For a second I stood there, staring at it, waiting for the world to undo itself. It didn't. So I picked up my bag, opened the door, and stepped out. And as the hallway light swallowed me, the only thought I had was this. If I didn't do this, then someone wanted me to take the fall. And Adrian Vale, the man who'd sworn he was careful, had just handed them exactly what they wanted. The next day, Orion froze my payments. The contract had a clause, termination for breach of confidentiality. It didn't matter that I didn't breach anything. It mattered that Adrian believed I did. My landlord didn't care about my innocence. He cared about rent. My bank app showed numbers that looked like a countdown. And the worst part, no one would hire me. Because when a company like Orion quietly tags you as a security risk, doors don't close. They vanish. I tried calling Adrian, straight to voicemail. I emailed him, no response. I went to Orion's lobby. Security refused to let me in. "He said you're not to enter the building," the guard told me, avoiding my eyes like my shame was contagious. On day 12, I broke. I cried in the shower because it was the only place I could pretend the world wasn't watching. And then, on day 13, my anger arrived. Not the dramatic kind. The clean, sharp kind that gives you oxygen. If someone framed me, they used Adrian's world to do it. So I was going to go into his world, without permission. I waited until day 15, when I knew Adrian would be at an investor dinner. His schedule was still public because journalists tracked him like weather. I wore black. No perfume. Hair tucked under a beanie like I was nobody. His apartment building in Canary Wharf had a doorman and cameras and a keypad. But money can buy security, and desperation can buy patience. I slipped in behind a couple carrying shopping bags, smiled like I belonged, and walked straight to the lift. My hands shook the entire ride up. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled like polished wood and expensive silence. Adrian's door was exactly where I remembered it, from the one time he'd let me drop off a folder, before everything shattered. I pulled a bobby pin from my pocket. I wasn't proud of knowing how to use it, but I'd learned skills when life didn't give me choices. The lock clicked. My heart jumped. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The apartment was dim, spotless, controlled, like him. I didn't go to the bedroom. I didn't touch anything unnecessary. I went straight to the office. Laptop, password protected. Safe, biometric. But the shelves were human. I scanned folders, papers, a thin stack of printed emails. Then I saw it. A perfume bottle on his desk. Not mine. Feminine. Expensive. Familiar. A memory flashed. Adrian's ex, Veronica Steele, a PR executive who moved like a blade and smiled like a threat. I'd met her once during the engagement phase. She'd squeezed my hand too tightly and said, "He gets bored easily." I'd laughed then. Now I didn't. I searched his desk drawers, receipts, cufflinks, a small black USB, and underneath a folder labeled Gala Security, I found a printed screenshot of a log, access timestamps, audit file, leak path, and one name repeated in the admin override column, V. Steele. My breath stopped. I flipped through more pages. A private email chain. The consultant is useful. Let her take the fall. My hands went cold. Veronica had done it. She'd used my identity to create a fake access trail, then leaked the audit, then let Adrian find the proof pointing to me. And Adrian, hurt, furious, did the rest himself. I swallowed, rage burning my throat. I could fix this. I could show him. I grabbed the pages, then stopped. Footsteps, a key turning, my blood froze. Adrian wasn't supposed to be home. The door opened. Light spilled in, and Adrian Vale's voice cut through the apartment like a weapon. Layla. I turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, eyes dark, coat still on, as if he'd come back just to catch me. I held the papers up like a shield. I can explain. Adrian's jaw clenched. You broke into my home. I was framed. His eyes flicked to the pages, just a glance. Then his gaze hardened again. You're still manipulating. No, I whispered. Adrian, please, listen to me. It was Veronica. I have... He stepped forward, and for a second I thought he might actually take the proof. Instead, he grabbed my wrist. Tight. Furious. Get out, he hissed. Adrian! Get out before I call security. Tears burned my eyes. You won't even look? His voice dropped into something colder than anger. You ruined me, he said. You ruined Orion, and you're still here acting like I owe you attention. My chest cracked. I didn't do it, I whispered. Adrian pointed at the door. Leave, and don't come back. I stumbled out with the proof still in my hands, heart pounding like it wanted to escape my ribs. Outside his door, I leaned against the wall and tried not to collapse. Because now I knew the truth, and the man I loved refused to hear it. I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because my mind kept replaying Adrian's face when he told me I ruined him, like the word Layla had turned into poison in his mouth. I still had the proof. But proof means nothing if the judge refuses to see it. So I did something humiliating. I begged for 5 minutes, not over email, not on the phone, in person. On day 19, I waited outside Orion's back entrance like a shadow. Adrian emerged after midnight, tie loosened, eyes exhausted, body carrying the weight of a company that hated him. He saw me and stopped, not surprised, disgust. Why are you here? He snapped. I held the folder out. Please, 5 minutes. That's all I need. Adrian's gaze flicked to it, then away. I don't want anything from you. My voice shook. I'm going to lose my flat. He paused, just a fraction. Then he said the most cruel, controlled sentence I'd ever heard. Good. I flinched like he'd slapped me. Adrian's jaw tightened as if he hated his own cruelty but wouldn't take it back. Adrian, I whispered, I loved you. His eyes flashed. Don't. I did, I insisted, even before the contract. For a heartbeat, something cracked in him. Then he rebuilt the wall. You want a chance to speak? He said slowly. Fine. Hope flared in my chest. Then he added, You'll earn it. My hope froze. He stepped closer, voice low. I'm hosting a private party at my home this weekend. Investors, board members, people who smile while they sharpen knives. I swallowed. Okay. Adrian's gaze was cold. You want me to listen? Then you'll work. Work? As staff, he said, in my house. My stomach sank. You want to punish me. Adrian didn't deny it. I want to see if you're still willing to look me in the eye while you lie. My throat burned. But I needed him to listen. I needed my name back. So I nodded. Fine. Adrian's expression didn't soften. You'll be paid. Minimum. Minimum? I repeated, bitter. He shrugged. You're lucky I'm offering anything. Then he walked away, leaving me on the pavement with humiliation in my mouth and a plan in my hands. The party night arrived on day 23. His apartment looked like a magazine spread. Lights dimmed, jazz humming, catering staff moving like ghosts. I wore a simple black uniform they gave me. Tight collar, white apron, hair pinned up. The mirror didn't show a fiancé. It showed a servant. Adrian barely looked at me when I entered. He stood by the bar, suit perfect, smile fake, eyes tired, but I caught the moment his gaze dropped to my hands. No ring. A flicker of something passed through him. Regret? Relief? Then vanished. I carried trays, refreshed drinks, smiled at people who didn't see me, and the entire time I waited for a moment alone with Adrian. Then the wrong moment came first. A man in a tailored suit. Confident, careless, the kind who thought familiarity was a privilege. I recognized him instantly, one of Veronica's friends, always laughing too loud, always watching too closely. "You look familiar," he said, eyes sliding over me with open interest. "Aren't you—" Before I could move, his hand reached for my wrist. The contact barely lasted a second. "Don't!" Adrian's voice cut through the room. Low, sharp, absolute. The man froze. Adrian was already there, having crossed the distance without anyone noticing. His presence was sudden, heavy, like the air had shifted. "Take your hand off her," Adrian said, each word deliberate. The man laughed nervously. "Relax, Adrian. Adrian took one more step forward. "Close enough. This is my house," he said quietly, "and you're done for the night." The color drained from the man's face. He muttered something under his breath and backed away fast, disappearing into the crowd without another word. The music kept playing. The party pretended nothing had happened. I stood there, heart racing, my wrist still burning. Adrian didn't look at me at first. He was controlling his breathing, his fists, whatever violent thought had crossed his mind. Then he turned. His gaze locked onto mine, dark, unreadable. "Already finding new bait?" he said slowly. The words landed like a slap. I froze, not from fear, from fury. I lifted my chin and met his stare head on. "Is that what you think?" For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Like he'd wanted a reaction. He didn't get the one he expected. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I stood there, steady, refusing to look guilty when I wasn't. Adrian studied me, jaw tight. Then he exhaled through his nose and looked away, anger reined back in. "Stay out of trouble tonight," he said, voice flat again. "I don't want any scenes." I nodded once. I wasn't planning one. Our eyes held for a heartbeat longer. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the echo of his anger, and the quiet certainty in my chest that no matter how much he doubted me, I wasn't going to bend. Not anymore. After the party, the apartment emptied slowly, staff cleaned, lights dimmed. When the last guest left, Adrian finally entered the kitchen where I stood gripping my folder like my life depended on it. He looked exhausted, angry, conflicted. "Talk," he said. My throat tightened. "It was Veronica." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Don't start." "I have proof," I said quickly, opening the folder, spreading pages on the counter. Logs, emails, her admin override. Adrian stared at the documents. I watched his face shift, disbelief to confusion to something sharp and dangerous. He grabbed one page, then another, scanning fast. His breathing changed. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "In your office," I admitted. "The night you caught me." Adrian's eyes flashed. "So, you were telling the truth?" "Yes," I whispered. "And you still threw me out." Adrian went silent. Then he exhaled hard and said, "Cameras." I blinked. "What?" He walked quickly to his office, pulled up his security system, fingers moving with controlled rage. "Party footage," he muttered. "Building footage, access footage, anything." He paused, jaw clenched. Then he looked at me, voice rough. "If she did this," he said, "I want her destroyed." My pulse jumped, because I'd never heard Adrian sound like revenge, and I realized I wasn't the only one who'd been betrayed. Adrian didn't ask me to leave. He didn't apologize either. Instead, he summoned every department head before sunrise. Legal, IT security, internal audit. I stood in the glass-walled office while evidence piled up on screens. Logs, timestamps, access trails. I watched professionals confirm what I'd already known in my bones. My credentials had been forged. The admin override came from Veronica's old clearance, reactivated quietly. The leak originated from a device registered to her PR firm. There was no room left for doubt. When it was over, the room emptied. Doors closed. Silence returned. I picked up my bag. "My part's done," I said calmly. "I'm leaving." Adrian didn't look up from his laptop. "No." I paused. Excuse me. "You'll stay here," he said. "In the guest room." I laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. "You doubted me, you humiliated me, and now that I've proven I'm innocent, you think I'll stay?" Adrian finally looked at me, not angry, focused. "You're not staying because of me," he said. "You're staying because Veronica knows too much." I shook my head. "That's not my problem anymore." I turned toward the door. Adrian moved, fast. He didn't touch me at first, just stepped close enough that his presence wrapped around me like a wall. He leaned in slightly, voice low, almost conversational, like he was reading thoughts straight off my spine. "You're thinking," he murmured, "that if you stay here, you'll give in." My breath caught. "And you're right," he added quietly. I stiffened. "Don't." He straightened, a hint of dry humor touching his mouth. "I'm not asking." My eyes narrowed. "You can't force me." Adrian's gaze flicked over my face, assessing, not threatening, but certain. "If you don't comply," he said lightly, "I know exactly how to make you." There it was. Not cruelty, control. And I hated how familiar it felt. I stepped back. "I won't stay. Not after what you did." I reached for the door. "Layla." I didn't turn. "I remember you telling me you love me." The words hit harder than any command. I stopped dead. Slowly, I turned back. My voice was tight. "You didn't believe me." Adrian took a step closer, his expression finally cracking, just enough to let something raw show through. "I didn't believe myself," he said quietly. I swallowed. "That doesn't give you the right to use it against me." "I'm not," he replied. "I'm reminding you why this isn't as simple as walking away." I shook my head. "I won't stay, regardless." Adrian closed the distance then. This time, he did touch me. One arm sliding around my waist, firm but not rough, pulling me close enough that I could feel his breath. "You don't know," he said, voice low against my ear, "what I've been going through since the day I met you." My chest tightened painfully. I pushed my hands against his chest, not hard enough to escape, just enough to breathe. "Let me go," I whispered. For a moment, he didn't. Then slowly, reluctantly, he loosened his grip, but his eyes stayed on mine, dark with things neither of us was ready to name. "This isn't over," he said. I picked up my bag again. "No," I replied softly. "It isn't." And this time, when I walked toward the door, he didn't stop me, but I felt his gaze follow me all the way out. Like a man realizing control was the one thing he was about to lose. Over the next week, things moved fast. Adrian pulled footage from multiple angles: Orion server logs, Gala camera feeds, building access records. The pattern was clear. My credentials had been forged. The admin override came from Veronica's old access Celeste had quietly reactivated. And the leak had been sent from a secure device registered to a private PR firm, Veronica's firm. But proving something in the dark world of corporate warfare isn't about truth. It's about making truth undeniable. So Adrian set a trap. By the end of the week, I received an email. A job interview, a senior consultancy role, private firm, discreet clients, high pay, too good to be real. I almost deleted it, but curiosity and rent won. The address led me somewhere I didn't expect. Adrian's building. I stopped in the lobby, heart slamming, then the elevator doors opened. And there he was. "You set this up," I said flatly. "Yes," Adrian replied. I turned to leave. "Veronica will be here tonight," he added calmly. I froze. "She thinks it's reconciliation," he continued. "She thinks she's walking into leverage." My hands clenched. "And I'm the bait." Adrian didn't deny it. "You're the truth." I looked at him, fury and hurt tangling in my chest. "You had no right." "I know," he said quietly. but I'm done letting her hide behind you. Against my better judgment, I followed him upstairs. He had also invited Veronica to his apartment under the pretense of reconciliation. I wasn't supposed to be seen. I sat in the guest room with my phone recording audio, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. At 8:12 p.m., Veronica arrived. Her laugh floated down the hall, confident, certain. Then her heels clicked across the floor. "Adrian," she purred. "I knew you'd come back to your senses." Adrian's voice was calm. "Sit." A pause. "What's this?" she asked, amused. "Closure," Adrian replied. I held my breath. Veronica laughed. "Oh, darling, don't be dramatic. You needed the leak. It wiped out the vote against you." Silence. Then Adrian said, deadly quiet, "So you admit you leaked it?" Veronica paused. Then she laughed again, slower. "You can't prove it." Adrian's voice didn't rise. "Try me." I heard papers slide. A laptop open. A click. Veronica's tone shifted slightly. "Where is she?" My stomach clenched. Adrian stayed steady. "Who?" "Layla," Veronica said, voice turning sharp. "You're not stupid enough to believe her." Adrian's reply came like ice. "She was innocent." Veronica's laugh turned ugly. "Innocent? Adrian, she knew about the vault. She was a risk. I solved it for you." I gripped my phone so hard my fingers hurt. "She was my fiancée," Adrian snapped. Veronica scoffed. "She was a contract." A beat. Then Veronica added softly, viciously, "And you were getting attached. I could see it. I won't lose you to a girl who wears poverty like perfume." My face burned. Adrian's voice dropped. "You already lost." Veronica's heels clicked. She stood, angry now. "Fine," she hissed. "Let's talk business. What do you want? A public confession? A payout? Because I'll tell you right now, if you expose me, I expose you." Adrian's tone sharpened. "Expose what?" Veronica's smile was audible. "You think the vault is the only secret Orion has? Adrian, you inherited your father's sins, and if you burn me, I burn you with me." My blood went cold, because that sounded real. Then Veronica said the sentence that changed everything. "And I still have the original file, before the edits, the version with the names." Adrian went silent. I felt my stomach drop. Names meant people. People meant lives. Adrian's voice turned dangerously controlled. "Where is it?" Veronica laughed. "Not here, but I can get it, if you choose me." I couldn't stay hidden. I stepped out of the guest room. The living room froze. Veronica turned, eyes widening, then narrowing like a knife. "You!" she spat. "You're still here!" Adrian's eyes flicked to me, tense. "Layla," but I was done being a ghost. I lifted my phone. I recorded everything. Veronica's face went pale. Then she smiled. Too calm. "Cute," she said. "Do you think that protects you?" She pulled her own phone out, tapped once, and looked at Adrian. "You should check your email," she said sweetly. Adrian's phone buzzed. His face changed as he read. Then he looked up at me, eyes sharp with fear for the first time. Veronica smiled wider. "I sent the names file," she whispered, "to 3 journalists. Scheduled delivery. If I don't cancel it, Orion burns tomorrow morning." My throat tightened. Adrian's jaw clenched. "Leave," he told Veronica. She walked to the door like a queen. Before she exited, she looked back at me and said quietly, "You wanted his love? Congratulations. Now you'll watch him choose his company over you." The door shut. Silence slammed into the room. Adrian stared at his phone like it was a bomb. Then he looked at me, voice hoarse. "We have 12 hours, he said, "before she destroys everything." Adrian didn't sleep. Neither did I. We spent the night hunting for Veronica's names file, like it was a ticking virus inside the world. At 2 a.m., Adrian called his cybersecurity head. At 3 a.m., he pulled bank transfers and phone records. At 4 a.m., we traced the scheduled journalist drop to a private cloud server. At 5 a.m., Adrian finally looked at me. Really looked. Not as a liability, not as a contract, as someone he'd hurt. "I was wrong," he said. The words were simple, but they landed like a collapse. I swallowed, voice shaking. "You destroyed me." Adrian flinched. I know. And you made me work as a waitress, I added, bitter. His jaw tightened. I was angry. And jealous, I said, before I could stop myself. Adrian went still. I met his eyes. You were jealous when that man touched me. Adrian's voice dropped. Yes. For a moment, the anger inside me fought the softness inside me. Then Adrian said quietly, I planned to tell you I had feelings. That night of the leak, I was going to end the contract and ask you to stay anyway. My throat tightened. You didn't, I whispered. I didn't get the chance, he said, because I thought you betrayed me. I stared at him for a long second. Then I said, so we destroy her. Adrian's eyes hardened. Together. By noon, we had a plan. We would make her confess, publicly. Adrian invited Celeste Vane and 2 board members to Orion's private conference suite for an emergency resolution. Veronica was invited too, under the promise of a payout and immunity. She arrived confident, lipstick perfect, eyes smug. She didn't know Adrian had already copied her cloud server through a backdoor her own IT guy left open. She didn't know I'd prepared the evidence packet, logs, recordings, her confession from Adrian's living room. She didn't know the journalists she'd threatened Orion with were already in the building, waiting. And she definitely didn't know Adrian was done being controlled. When everyone sat, Adrian spoke calmly. Veronica, he said, cancel the scheduled leak. Veronica smiled. Or what? Adrian nodded at the screen. The audio file played, her voice clear as glass. I leaked it. I solved it for you. Veronica's smile froze. The board members exchanged sharp looks. Veronica stood abruptly. That's edited. Adrian clicked again. The screen displayed the server logs, her admin override, her device ID, her firm's IP address. Veronica's face went pale. This is extortion, she hissed. No, Adrian said coldly. This is consequence. Veronica's breath shook. Adrian, please. Adrian cut her off. You used Layla as a scapegoat. Veronica's eyes flashed. Because she was stealing you. The room went silent. Adrian leaned forward. I was never yours. Veronica trembled, anger and panic mixing. Then she did the stupidest thing possible. She lunged for Adrian's laptop. Security grabbed her arms. Veronica screamed, struggling. You can't do this. I'll destroy you. Adrian's voice stayed low. You already tried. He nodded at his assistant. The journalists were escorted in. Cameras, questions, a storm. Veronica's face collapsed into horror, because now she wasn't controlling the narrative. She was inside it. It took 2 days for the public fallout to spread. Veronica's firm cut ties, sponsors dropped her, investigations began, and slowly, painfully, my name started to recover. A week later, Adrian called a press conference. Not to save Orion, to save me. He stood at the podium and said, Layla Hart was falsely accused. The company apologizes. I apologize. The world listened because powerful men rarely admit fault. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Because apologies don't erase the nights I cried in the shower, or the way he looked away when I begged. On day 52, Adrian asked to see me, alone. No cameras, no assistants, no contracts. We met on the same balcony where it had broken. London lights below, wind cold enough to sting. Adrian didn't reach for me. He just spoke. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, but I'm asking anyway. I swallowed, tears threatening. You hurt me on purpose, he nodded once. I did. And you still want me? I whispered. Adrian's voice turned rough. More than I wanted anything I've ever owned. Silence stretched. I looked at him, this man who had been both my dream and my disaster. Then I said, I'm not your contract. Adrian stepped closer, eyes soft. I know. And if we do this, I said, it will take time. Adrian nodded. I'll wait. I exhaled shakily. And you'll never punish me again. His gaze held mine. Never. I stared at his hand, open, not demanding. I took it. And for the first time, he held me like he was afraid to break what he'd almost lost. He didn't kiss me immediately. He rested his forehead against mine and whispered, I'm sorry. And this time, I believed him.